Welcome back, YouTube, to another episode of 10 with Travis, where we take just 10 minutes a day to dive deeper in the Word so you can be more equipped today than you were yesterday. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the first 9 plagues that Moses, from God, sent on to the Egyptians. So, last episode, we talked about Moses as he grew into adulthood, how he killed the Egyptian who, was hurting one of his people, which was a Hebrew. And then we also just looked at and talked about how Moses did not feel like he was qualified to be who God called him to be. And I think a lot of us can take just a good lesson from that, because I think a lot of us feel like that, or the devil tries to tell us that, and we need to know that God will use us right where we're at. Any weakness that we have, God is ready to use and put his supernatural on top of it so that our weakness through him can be made into a strength. So today we're going to be talking about the 9 plagues. And when we looked at Joseph, Joseph moved into the land and he was working under Pharaoh. But now this is many, many years later. So there's a new Pharaoh in town, and the same, people, the same position, which was who the Pharaoh was that blessed these Israelites, is now someone who is enslaving them. So this is where Moses from God is being directed to put the 10 plagues on the Egyptians to let them go into the wilderness. So Pharaoh is going to have a hard heart, and we're going to see some of that as we read through. So the first plague that God gives Moses is turning water to blood. So we see that in Exodus 7:20 through 22, and it reads, Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded. In the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, he lifted up the staff and struck the water in the Nile, and all the water in the Nile turned into blood. And the fish in the Nile died, and the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. But the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them, as the Lord had said. So we see the first plague come. We're going to see this theme in the next plague as well, but not in all of them, that Pharaoh had his own people, his magicians, try it, and they were successful. So because of that, it really hardened Pharaoh's heart, because he is like, well, that ain't from their God, because my magicians can do the same. So forget what you said. I'm not going to abide by it. So we go into the second plague, which is the frogs. Then the Lord said to Moses, Go into Pharaoh and say to him, Thus says the Lord, Let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile should swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into the house of your servants and your people, and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you and your people and all your servants. So we see from these verses that God is giving Pharaoh basically an option. He's saying, either let my people go or have something bad come upon you. So Pharaoh is either, there's a couple different options. He either just doesn't care about his people, or he doesn't actually think God is legit. So he's trying to test God to see if God is legit. Now, I think sometimes in our lives, we, in different ways, kind of hear God saying something, but we might test him in a way that we really shouldn't. So we make sure we are not like Pharaoh, and that when we get direction from God, we really need to step into that. Because once you step into that, even if you're wrong in your course, that step of faith is what is pleasing to God. So when you step into something, even if it's not exactly right, you didn't hear exactly right from God, he's going to direct your path exactly where you need to go. So Pharaoh then, after the frogs actually happened, his magicians did the same thing. They made frogs themselves, which is very ironic because they just doubled the problem. He was so arrogant that instead of getting rid of the problem, he wanted to prove, arrogant and prideful, that he wanted to prove that his people could also do that. So he doubled the problem with frogs. But he then come pleading after that to Moses and Aaron and said that he'll let him go as long as they get rid of the frogs. So Moses pleaded to God. God went ahead and killed the frogs, and then they kind of picked up all the frogs and dispose of them. But what happens is right after that, Pharaoh, goes back on his deal and decides not to let them go, and that's where the cycle goes, on to the next plague and the next plague and the next plague. So the next 7 plagues are, so again, we had 2. So gnats, flies, killing of their livestock, sores on the Egyptians. So they had sores covered kind of all over, hail, locusts, and darkness. So those are the first 9. So as I talked about with the frogs, and we read it in the Word with the turning the water into blood, the magicians were able to actually do all of those things for those 2. But for some of these other plagues, they weren't able to do them. So they even pleaded to Pharaoh and said, yeah, this must truly be a work of their God. So everyone around them, around Pharaoh, was realizing that God was real. God was legit. He was who he said he was. He has the power that he says he has. But Pharaoh's heart was so hardened that he didn't care. Pharaoh was also so prideful and arrogant that he wanted to be on top. He didn't think or want anyone in heaven or earth to be above him. He thought he was at the very top of the food chain. So what God is going to have to do next is he's going to have to really give Pharaoh a wake-up call. And that's what we see in the 10th plague. So we're not going to talk about the 10th plague today, but on the next episode, we will talk about the 10th plague and talk about the Passover and all of that. And it will link to some stuff, as they continue to go about their journey and they continue to celebrate Passover. And, it's a foreshadowing of Christ as well. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. But today I just wanted to really speak about the 9 plagues. Again, we all hear about the 10 total plagues, but we don't really know or remember what they are. So to recap, they are excuse me, the water turned to blood, then the frogs, then the gnats, then the flies, then the killing of their livestock, then the sores on the Egyptians, the hail, the locusts, and darkness, and finally the 10th plague, which we'll talk about in the next episode, will be a secret. So that does it for today. I hope this has blessed you. If it really has and you'd like to give to the network so we can continue to make more videos, we can continue to reach more people, please see the ways below to give to the network. If you have questions or comments, please drop them below or email us. We're open to either. We'd love to hear from you. We've gotten a few comments lately, and I appreciate all the support from that. Have a blessed day. Have a great week or rest of the week, depending when you are watching this. And we thank you so much, and we will see you on the next episode of 10 with Travis.